what are the funds of the corporation versus the income, that you're taking personally. So just be aware, it's very important, just an important standard practice, best practice, to keep personal funds and business funds separate and distinct from one another. That's important. Okay? All right. As I said, officers and directors owe fiduciary duty to the shareholders to run the corporation in such a way that makes it profitable. Okay, that's the fiduciary duty and fiduciary duty of care and of loyalty that they owe. They owe this duty to try to make the shareholders money. Okay? That is not to say that if a company has an unprofitable year, that they've necessarily violated that duty of care, that duty of loyalty. But they do have to act with due diligence in making good business decisions, sound business practices, and things like that. When we're talking about due diligence, one of the main things I want to bring up, make sure that everybody understands, when I'm talking about due diligence, for example, if a business were to be interested in buying another business, due diligence requires that the corporation very carefully investigate the financials of the business that they want to buy. A colonoscopy-like investigation of the internals, of a corporation to ensure that that is a good business decision, especially before a merger or acquisition. There's also responsibilities that officers and directors have to not take action in corporate restructuring, which has the effect of diluting the value of the shares. Okay? So if you own 10% of shares of a corporation, the corporation share classes should not be restructured in such a way that your voting power would be diluted by the addition of additional share classes. Okay? Because then what used to be a 10% voting right that you might have might now become a 5%. So your power was lost. That would be a violation, I think, of the duties that officers and directors have, perhaps. Okay. Couple last thing on corporations. Corporations have the right of have constitutional rights, just like an individual does. Just like a corporation can be a citizen of a state, a corporation has constitutional rights like the freedom of speech. A corporation can be incorporated anywhere and still do business in Florida, so long as they receive permission from the state of Florida to do business in Florida. Okay, disadvantages of a corporation are largely taxation. Okay, so if we go back to our ABC, we're going to call it ABC Corp now. Corp. With $100,000 in asset, or in income, let's just say taxable income for our purposes. What will happen in a C corporation is that the corporation will file their tax return with the IRS, and the corporation is going to have to pay the corporate income tax rate. I believe it is currently 34%. Trump is proposing 20%. We'll see what happens. Okay, let's go with the current plan of 34%. That means that $34,000 goes straight to the IRS. Now, there's only how much left? $66,000. Did I do my math right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because $34,000 has gone to the IRS. Now, instead of A shareholder and B shareholder receiving 60 and 40, they're now receiving, now my math is all screwed up. Okay, we'll go back to calling them equal partners just for the sake of clarity. Now they're down to 33 and 33. Okay, they've lost a heck of a lot of money to that corporate income tax, right? Now guess what happens? A and B have to report to the IRS that they received $33,000 of income. They have to pay to the IRS, based on whatever their own individual tax rate is, taxes on their 33 and their 33.
But they
Okay.
can get that 33, that's staying in the business, right?
Well,
I mean, I guess they could do like a,
depends on if we're talking about a dividend or a capital gain, or for purposes of
Okay.
this, I'm just saying tax. But remember C plus student,
Mm-hmm.
keeping it really easy with taxable income, just say taxable income. Yeah, that they're gonna have to pay taxes on this. This is on their own individual rate, okay? The point here, more than anything else, is that there's double taxation, right?
Yep.
The corporate entity got taxed, and then the individual shareholders are getting taxed. And that's not good. Nobody likes that. All right. Let's go to S corporations. S corporations. S, generally speaking, I think stands for small, okay? One of the advantages of an S corporation, largely, is that this whole double taxation problem goes away. Okay, S corporations are not taxed in this way. S corporations are taxed in the way that that partnerships are taxed. We go back to that original example. The entity, the corporate entity, would not get taxed. Only certain types of businesses can be S corporations. So they generally have to be a smaller business, smaller corporation size, for the most part. But that is certainly one big advantage. A couple things that an S corp can't do, if they're gonna receive this nice little tax benefit, there cannot be multiple classes of shares. Okay, in a lot of corporations, especially bigger ones, there's multiple classes of shares: Class A, Class B, Class C shares, preferred shares, non-preferred shares. And those different classes of shares can have different dividend payouts. Some might declare dividends, some might not declare dividends. There can be different advantages and disadvantages of different classes of shares. An S corp cannot do that. What an S corp can do, though, which is good, is that there can be non-voting and voting rights. They can have different shares classes to make some voting and some non-voting. That's what makes S corps honestly really great for family businesses.
is that how they get around that rule then, by voting and not voting?
How so?
You said multiple class of shares, so they
Right.
divide them into voting and non-voting, is that so they can?
Usually, when I'm talking about multiple classes of shares in that context, I'm talking probably more about different classes of shares that have different financial payouts and different rights associated with, in other words, some shares, like a preferred share, might be more valuable than a common share.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Not
Yeah.
voting and non-voting.
Right,
Okay.
exactly.
Got it.
So there can be non-voting and voting shares in an S corporation. Makes it great for family businesses. For example, let's just say that there's a family business owned by mom and dad. They want to pass it along to the kids. Kids are going to run the business now. Mom and dad are out, but mom and dad want to keep a financial interest in it because, they started it. It can be structured so that mom and dad don't have voting rights, but they do have
They get money out of it.
equity rights. Exactly.
They still get the same protection as the LLCs?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, shareholders of an S corporation will still have the same, they're shareholders, just like shareholders in a C corporation, they are not personally liable. Okay, so that's a big advantage of a S corporation.
One person business, can it be like a one person S corp, or?
Yeah.
Could it be more?
Yeah, you could have a one person S
What
corp.
would be better, that or like a LLC?
I'm sorry?
So what would be better, a S corp or LLC?
That would have to be a very case-by-case kind of situation. I've seen a lot of different business organizations that probably could have gone either way. Because the advantages are often the same. It's gonna be a tax question about which would be more favorable in S corporation. And that would be based upon a lot of other tax considerations for that particular business, so.
I used to work for a
C
small
plus.
business. I used to work for a small business. It was a local music store, and it's just like husband and wife own the store. It's
Right.
like he's the president, she's the vice president, but she filed it as an S corp
Yeah,
because for the tax purposes.
exactly, yeah. It's very often used by family businesses and can be used very effectively, so. Okay, I won't spend much time on LLCs because I've kind of hashed through a lot of the advantages and disadvantages of the other business organizations that are pretty, a lot of the same. What are LLCs, generally speaking, preferred business form? Vast majority of new filings of new businesses in the state of Florida are organized as LLCs. They are taxed like a partnership or like an S corp, okay, depending on how you want to look at this. You have the benefit of the pass-through taxation, which is quite favorable. Members of an LLC, owners of an LLC, will not be personally liable. So that's an advantage that they have as well. Of course, though, the entity is always liable. It doesn't change with an LLC. Basically, LLCs are the best of all the worlds here that we've talked about. The only disadvantage that I would say for an LLC is there are filing fees and filing requirements associated with it. There should be a member agreement, which is much like a shareholders or much like a partnership agreement. Again, establishing what rights and responsibilities exist amongst the owners of the business, the managing members of the business, of the LLC. But that should arguably exist in any of these other business forms as well, so that's not unique to LLCs. In an LLC, it's not a partnership agreement, it's known as an operating agreement. Okay, that's the terminology that would control an LLC. An operating agreement is what's going to dictate those understandings between the members of an LLC. A couple things about the 2014 changes that are notable. Just like with partnerships, or similar to partnerships, duties of care and loyalty cannot be waived away. Okay, so that's the same concept there. There are penalties, this is notable, there are penalties for filing inaccurate articles of incorporation for an LLC. So in other words, if an LLC is initially structured one way in the articles of incorporation, and then it subsequently changes, because let's say a member leaves or sells off a percentage, or there's been some significant shift, change in the business, in the ownership of the business, and that isn't updated with the state isn't notified of that, there can be penalties associated with that. So that again, so my point of that, the filing requirements are a little stricter. They're a little bit tighter on making sure that information is accurate. There can be a statement of authority for members, just like when we talked about partners. A statement of partnership authority would be the same kind of statement of authority for LLC members that has to be filed with the state, or can be filed with the state. That is basically notice to the public who in the LLC has authority to bind the LLC. Kind of an important thing to know if you're engaging in a sale or purchase of an LLC or assets of an LLC or real estate transactions, things like that. So, all right, any questions about that? And then we'll go through contracts pretty quickly. Any questions on LLCs? Okay. So, 3 big components of a contract: offer, acceptance, and consideration. An offer in a contract must be definite and certain. You need to know what you are offering to somebody to sell. They need to understand the terms of the offer. Okay, it needs to be, for example, I offer to sell you a vehicle. Is that a definite and certain offer? We don't really know what vehicle I'm offering. We don't know how much I'm offering it for sale. Okay, or even if I said I might offer you my vehicle for sale, well, are you or aren't you? So that lacks some definiteness, not some certainty. An offer can be terminated if it is rejected. That makes it, that's pretty obvious, right? If I submit an offer to buy your house and you reject my offer, well, now the offer is off the table, right? But it can also die, basically, if it's not accepted, or revoked, or withdrawn, or not accepted within a reasonable period of time. I offer to buy your house, and you simply say nothing, right? Well, you can't come back to me a year later and say, I accept the offer. Okay, reasonable amount of time, an unreasonable amount of time has passed. Now, of course, that's kind of a silly example that I gave, because almost any offer to buy a house is going to have a very specific time frame in the contract saying, you know, how long the offer is valid for. But I'm pretending, and it's late, so. Okay, acceptance. The person accepting the offer has to have capacity to be able to accept it. Okay? They, generally speaking, have to be of sound mind. They need to be of age, not a minor, over the age of 18. Not incapacitated. Again, sound mind, not under the influence of drugs or alcohol. They must have the ability to be there, this meeting of the minds to accept the offer. Acceptance cannot be under duress. I cannot hold a gun to your head and say, buy my car. Because what are you going to say? If, yes, sure. What do you want? I'll pay $200,000 for your '89 Camry, right? Okay? You're under duress in that scenario. You had no choice but to say yes. Of course you're going to say yes. Did we actually have a meeting of the minds? No, we did not. You were under duress when you agreed to that. Okay? So that's really the key to this. There has to be this meeting of the minds to create an enforceable contract. The terms of the contract, generally speaking, must be legal. By that I mean we cannot, a court will not enforce a contract for an illegal action. Okay? No court is going to enforce a contract, to take somebody out. A hitman's contract is not going to be enforced, right? Matter of public policy. You can't go to court and say, I asked him to kill my wife, but he only shot her in the arm. He didn't deserve the $100,000. No, okay, not an enforceable contract. It's an illegal act.
I've heard of people calling the police and saying my drug dealer ripped me off.
Yeah.
That's happened like more than once here in Alachua and Marion County.
Remarkable, right? Yeah, you get what you got. You got what you got coming to you. You make that phone call. Okay. Even if both parties agree, hey, yes, I was supposed to shoot. I was to shoot to kill, not just in the arm. Okay, doesn't matter if there's an agreement about this. Still an illegal act. That's not going to be enforced. That's not an enforceable contract. Consideration is the third element of a contract. What is consideration? Consideration is that something of value that is exchanged, that is required for there to be an enforceable contract. That something of value is either a promise to act or a promise to not act. What might be a promise to act? The promise to act that's most common is the payment of money. I promise to pay you X amount of money. You go and sign that lease agreement that we talked about at the beginning of class, right? I promise to pay $1,500 a month to live in that apartment. Okay? That's a promise that I made. That's the consideration. It's not the actual payment of the money. The payment of the money is the execution of the contract. The payment of the money is not what makes a valid contract a valid contract. You have a valid contract with that landlord once it's signed by both parties. Even though no money has been exchanged, you still have a valid contract at that point because there's a promised act. They are promising to give you a dwelling to live in. You are promising to pay for it. There's a valid contract at that point. It could be a promise to not act, to not do something that you have a legal right to do. One of the biggest